Hello, everyone. Welcome to the McGrath Institute for Church Life's kickoff to our year with the St. John's Bible. It's an ironic kickoff because when you generally kick something off, you have the Bible present. But it will be present starting in January 2017, so this is like a kind of foretaste of what shall arrive. So it will increase your desire. The McGrath Institute for Church Life nourishes the church's imagination through scholarship, pastoral education, and outreach, bringing Notre Dame to every corner of the world, and sometimes to our own little Geddes Hall. I want to thank a couple of people in particular. The Institute for Scholarship in the Liberal Arts made possible this our guest this evening. This also serves as our fall Michael Mathis CSC undergraduate liturgy lecture on campus. Michael Mathis founded the area of liturgical studies at Notre Dame, and we honor him both in the fall and the spring with a lecture. But you're not here to know that. You're here for Donald Jackson. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, Donald Jackson, who became interested in calligraphy as a child. Even then, he dreamed of writing the Bible by hand, as most children dream of. At the age of 13, he received a scholarship to art school, completing his studies at 19. So for the undergraduates present, let's just measure your life against that. A year later, at 20, he received an appointment as a visiting lecturer at London's Camberwell College of Art. In 1964, he became the youngest artist calligrapher to participate in the first post-World War II international calligraphy show of the Victoria and Albert Museum. That same year, he was appointed scribe at the Crown Office of the House of Lords, serving as an official calligrapher for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And in 1985, he received the Medal of the Royal Victorian Order. Most recently, he was inducted into the Order of St. Gregory the Great, sharing this honor of apostolic knighthood with our own Dr. John Cavadini. So if John was able to make it tonight, but he couldn't, there would be multiple knights in the room, which is always, that makes me feel good. That's all. But one knight shall do. Throughout his career, Donald has traveled to the United States teaching classes and giving lectures, including to St. John's Abbey and University in college. In 1995, he mentioned his dream of creating a handwritten, illuminated Bible to Father Eric Hollis, who was then director of the Hill Monastic Manuscript Library. 3 years later, after much conversation and planning and financial commitment, St. John's University commissioned Jackson to lead a team of calligrapher and artists in creating the St. John's Bible. 2 more years of planning followed, and Jackson himself made the first letters of the St. John's Bible on Ash Wednesday in the year 2000. The 7th and final volume was completed in 2011. Over the past several years, Donald Jackson has continued to travel, speaking about his experience of working on this Bible, which has captured the imaginations of believers and non-believers alike throughout the world. In April 2015, Jackson presented Pope Francis with the final volume of the St. John's Bible, and he additionally showed the same Bible to Pope Benedict XVI. So there is multiple papal joy at the existence of this Bible. Pope Francis granted this knighthood in the Order of St. Gregory, as I noted before, for this outstanding service to the Catholic Church. And as I learned earlier this evening, or yesterday, this is unique because Donald Jackson is a Methodist. but who has done this great work for the existence of the glory of God, which Methodists do often. Please welcome this evening Donald Jackson.
Well, you know, I think I should quit while I'm ahead. That was a lovely introduction, and I quite now I'm just checking to see that you can all hear. Can you? Right in the corner. And that corner? Excellent, thank you. Well, that's good, because that reminded me of, you know, years that have passed, and so on. And what Tim did not say was that and that's the very first time I have ever stood up and been introduced as having been made a papal knight, because I'm still trying to figure out what that means. You know, to me, I mean, I know it's an honour, but what I do know is that it was, I really did get a thrill from that. But mostly I have to say, because I could do it, I could accept that on behalf of not just me, but the other people, every one of whose input went into the project. Whether it was in the production of the original, my fellow artists and scribes, and also the people who've arranged to print the facsimile, which I was involved with. Actually, that 1911 is not quite true, because I was also then, for a couple more years, involved in concentrating on the printing of the facsimiles, because they did go on. I haven't been wandering the world telling like a wandering troubadour since then. As a matter of fact, I very seldom come and speak about the project. But thank you. So that was good. You had a build-up. You had some framework there. I'm going this evening. I mean, let's just backtrack. Last week I was in New York, or this week, and I had the most. I'd crashed and burned. I'd been in Tennessee and Oklahoma City, where there's been an exhibit open in Oklahoma City, which I treated myself and my wife to go there, because it was, I hadn't seen the volumes, the finished pages of the volumes for a long time. And I'll talk a bit about that afterwards, because it had quite an effect on me. And so I might forget, but I would like to, if the occasion arises. Because this project involves feelings, and when you expose your feelings to something, or you invest your feelings in a project which lasts so long, it becomes part of your life. You just heard for more than 15 years here, and a sort of dream that's been sort of nursed over a period of a whole working life. Then you put yourself on the line. And you're never quite sure exactly how much you're burning up as you go along. And that's sometimes, we've all done this, you know. But imagine doing that every single day for 15 years. That I've begun to realise was a burden. I mean, it was pressure. Yes, it's good now to be standing back, and it's great just to be able to share that sort of feeling with you and anything else that comes up. And I'll use I'll use the slides tonight as a framework, and the idea being that, you know, you get more under the skin of it rather than just seeing the product. So it'll be a bit about process. The crash and burn bit means that tonight was unlikely to be the crispest, smartest delivery of a talk you've ever heard, but we'll get there together somehow or other. If I start to fray, I'll say I'm starting to fray, and then just send wave of sympathy and support. So we haven't worked out a routine, but what I'd like to do, I love being able to see you. I mean, at the moment, you can see me, I can see you. Once we've got the slides on, I like to see those. So if possible, I'd like to have a break, a couple of breaks, so that you're not sitting in the dark. I'm able to see you, and you maybe, if you've any questions you want to ask, just yell, you know, or put your hand in the air if you're so inclined. So if you just like make yourself comfortable. If you've come to the wrong lecture, this is far better than the one you were going to. I did once go to a lecture, and it was the wrong lecture. I sat through the whole thing, and it was an hour, and it was in French. The whole thing was in French. And as Tim said, the kind of schooling I had, or didn't have, meant that I was quite innocent of anything other than, well, certainly no foreign languages. And I literally did go into I followed the wrong line, thinking I was going to get a lecture by Monsignor somebody or other from the Vatican on Renaissance manuscripts, and he only spoke French. I knew that, so I sat there for 45 minutes waiting for the slides, which never happened. And then in the end, the professor, who was your equivalent, stood up and thanked the speaker, and everybody clapped, and everyone started to go out. And then I collared the guy and said, "Wait," I said, "Where's Professor Brown's, what's going on?" I thought I'd see him. He said, "Oh, always happens. It's just you took the wrong turning at the bottom of the stairs." And I sat there. And anyway, I don't know why I got into that too much. It did dawn on me. I thought, well, priests, I wasn't as familiar with priests as I now am, because I hadn't worked all that with St. John's, etc. I thought, oh, they're dressing pretty sharp these days, because this guy turned out to be, I'd listened to 3/4 of an hour to an hour of Aristotelian philosophy in French, without knowing it, from some professor from, Paris. So there you are. So if you're in the wrong lecture, this is your last chance to leave. Okay, well, I'm going to start a little bit. Tim again mentioned beginnings. As a kid, I just loved messing about with ink and pens. And in those days, to write, when you learn to write, apart from pencil, which is your first thing, it was a sort of, what's the word, promotion to get to use the dip in pen. With a nib, you put in to lick it. If it was new, it doesn't take the ink to begin with, so you learn to lick it. You learn that if you licked it after you dipped it, it tasted really bad. In fact, it's acid, so you really knew it. And then after a bit, I actually, so when you learn to shape letters, you're actually also learning to master a tool. And we were talking about this last evening. Nowadays, you pick up a ballpoint or a fiber tip pen, it makes a mark. You don't have to, there's no skill in that. It will produce a mark. You can hold it upside down, it will make a mark, all this way. And so you see people holding them all different which ways. There's no real need to control it. And that's a loss, a tactile loss, a facility that tends to be lost. There are lots of gains in other directions, the fact that you don't have to do that. But anyway, I did get another promotion very soon afterwards. I became an ink monitor. An ink monitor meant that you got, on Monday mornings, you got the job of, why am I talking about this? We're supposed to be talking about the St. John's Bible. Well, all right, beginnings. But it's a lot more about touch. It's a lot more about getting a kick out of making something that was wet. And as a kid, you've very little that you control. The world's big. It's controlling you. You may give the world a run for its money by being naughty, which was an option I used to choose. But you've got very little. So the idea of being able to dip a pen into red ink and make marks with it, boy, there's power in that. There's a thrill in it. And that thrill is something that stayed with me ever since. So that it's that thrill I'm sort of wanting to get back to. That moment when you dip that pen in and you take it for a walk, take it for a play. And so that's all laying the sort of foundation, because it's personal, as I said. So if the person who's doing it, you've got to be able to acquire ability, skill, in order to be able to express those feelings and it within you, and to stick with that. And any musician knows this. Anybody in any craft or almost every walk of life, if there isn't that little bit of love, there isn't that little bit of chasing that thrill that you've got, then you just don't stick with it. You don't stick with the pain, the difficult bits. And so, enough of that. If we just dim the lights a little, please. Is anybody anywhere near the lights? Could you? Well, off. Do you have it? Oh, right. We've got control here. Off or on? No, I'm sure we've got a little. Do we have a graduation? We'll find that in a minute. It's not that important. It needs to be darker. I want you to have a real good look at what's on these things. Well, that should do it. I can see. Is that? Yeah, I can see you. That's the key. I'm a sort of. You've seen me now. I'm just trying to find a place to be.
If you hit it, it will work.
I mean, for me to see the slides, so I get fun out of them if I do. But it's all right, not to worry. I shouldn't be telling you what's in my head. It's just, let's just try. I'll shoot at the ceiling. Didn't work that, did it? So, that didn't. Brilliant. Back. There we are. Got that mastered. This, just a quick one. I grew up in a mill town. My folks were shopkeepers. But I used to go to school. Used to walk in that dim distance beyond those factory chimneys. Used to walk up that street, turn into that, and that's the little Methodist church. And behind it there was the school. But that was a good day, because during that week, it was the week that the whole town closed down. So because it was more practical to shut all the machines off at the same time and then have the week off. You can actually see as far as there, but normally you wouldn't be able to, because all those chimneys they're not belching smoke at the moment. Neither, if you notice, of these houses, each of which would be cooking on them as well. No traffic, not there as many, not at all, hardly. And there's a guy pushing a cart, literally. In that, I had left. I was 13 years old when that was taken, and I went there first when I was about 4 and a half. So, that's a shock to me, and as a lesson to any historians here, how really difficult it is to capture the real truth of the past, when I, who actually walk that street, find it hard to believe, to place that, to put 1951 on that date, on that thing. I would have believed it was 25 years early, and it isn't, So things have moved along since those days. But in that little school, I had a good teacher. I had a teacher who saw a kid who loved to draw. I did the other work, schoolwork, I was good at that. I wasn't very good at exams, and I flunked out, ended up in a sink school, which means, I don't know, sink school is a British expression for meaning it's no, you cannot get any lower. I didn't fit in, but I had yet another teacher who saw and put me in for a scholarship in a big town, which you would call a city, 250,000 people, just 10 miles away, a complete different world. But interestingly, in that little closed working community, I learned the beginnings a love for words. The teacher would show us how to unpick words, to show us where you have eos or various bits and pieces which are recognised as having a Greek beginning, or the Latin. We didn't have formal lessons in either, but we got that love and a notion stuck in here about the DNA of words, you know, where they thread it. And I just read something that I'd written in English only 3 days ago in a new book that's coming out, and it had been transformed into American, and the root of the word was lost. It was something like I forget what it is, like nerve-wracking, whereas here it's racking as in putting things on a shelf, whereas in the English it's got a W in front of it, which has a completely different root. It means it's torn. It's to do with shredding, and that's what happens to your nerves. They get shredded, but they don't get put onto the shelf. So, unless you're in the shrink's office or something. So, sorry, I'm getting a bit silly tonight. I told you it wasn't sharp. It's not going to be sharp. So move on. So these are the beginnings, but it all starts then. And when there was any spare time in lessons, it just shows you regimented lessons, credits, all of those boxes into which we have to fit would not have worked if for me, and the teacher just gave me some coloured inks. And this is in the war. This is in the middle of the war where you couldn't buy it. He just was using his own stuff. He himself was interested in calligraphy and lettering with it. It spilled over. So the teacher, the value of what the teacher can do with kids, especially kids who don't fit, not the ones who, who just, perform according to the rules, can change lives and continue doing so. And that's value next. So started there. When I went to art school, I was fortunate enough to have another guy who was interested in lettering. It was a sort of very minor subject, always has. It's still a mainstream craft subject to follow. But the point is, where do you learn? You learn, as you do here, from the past, as well as working with the absolute cutting edge of the present in the university setting. But first, I had my teachers were old things, and I learned from them. I'm going to get a crick in my neck if I keep looking at this. I learned from these not only about standards, I learned about manners. I learned about that things weren't perfect. That you didn't have to do everything perfect. I at one point thought too that this guy was sitting reading his book of hours in the garden drinking a glass of wine. But I realised the other day it's actually a flower, so not so much fun after all. And it's only a couple of weeks ago I saw that. I thought, no, that's not a glass of wine. But anyway, so you learn about the techniques, you copy them. You look at that, you look at that page. Now let me invite you to look at this. I can only point, there is a drawback. Unless I had a two-gun Pete, I could only do at the same time. So you see there, he tried to squash an S in there. You see, if you look there, where is it? Can I find an S? Everybody find me an S. There are two forms of S. That's an S, and there's also an S which is sort of never can see it when I want to. But that's an S, I think. So try to do that with too much ink on your pen. See what happens. You can see there he's dipped in fresh into the ink, and then it ran out a bit, and then it's gone a bit. You see the humanity of it, and you see the frailty of it. You also see that the guy who was writing that was having a really terrible time. As it matters, the one thing when the scribes were working in the studio, when we were working on the scripts, and they would bring work in that they'd done, we worked in the studio, I said, which ones are giving you, which ones are you unhappy, which letters do you come to, you're approaching a letter G and you're thinking, that's the one I have to work on with you. If you're not having fun, you haven't got it right. You haven't got it in you. It's not, you haven't got it. But the worst thing about this person was they were just, like, these books were done by mass production. They were churned out. They never, actually, any of them ever really saw the finished thing, probably. Let me just go back a moment. They would just write in the text, and then somebody else would add in the fancy bits. Somebody would do the rubrication. My guess is that is the same person, because it's just very similar to me. But the skin is just horrendous. This is something which belongs to me, this little book, and I know that the actual materials were cheap. They were low grade, scraped, coarse, like writing on a tea towel. You know, just didn't have that. Because the whole thing you learn about is you've got to get that feeling of feeling good, the ink working, the pen working, the surface working. Your heart lifts, and it goes into what you do. So all that I would ever say normally about techniques, ink, pens, all that, it's fascinating, but it doesn't fascinate me. It's just a means to an end. You know, I'm not interested in the cookery side of it, the fact that you're mixing egg yolks and parchment size to get it's because I either want a result. You put egg yolk in red, boy, it glows. It's terrific. You get a nice effect. So that's why it's in there. It also lasts well. You know that it's got integrity. Why do I choose one kind of paint against another? It's because it flows well. Because it works. It just is able to go. You know, it's like you put your foot on the accelerator and it goes. If you think that any of you have ever tried to do calligraphy with steel pens, working on unsuitable paper with probably gloppy ink, you know it's just like driving, you know, an old Ford T uphill, you know, and with half the family pushing. It's just not working. I don't know where these things come from. You must be bringing it out of me, actually. It's Indiana, I think. So this again is me copying. This is a copy I did of a medieval manuscript in a local library. And 12 miles away, you had a magnificent library which had been founded as a theological library. It started to be, but it ended up being lots of illuminated manuscripts. It was a place called Manchester, which is a sort of industrial city in the northwest of England. And so I went, but as an art student, there I was treated with a great deal of suspicion, because obviously art students are messy and untrustworthy naturally, and they got suede shoes and long hair. Not in my day, not in my day. But anyway, there's a story with this, but I have to really move, I don't know what's next. Yeah, it's looking at things, copying. The story about that was, and this is for students who, if you're ever wanting to research and you find barriers, you just got to work out how to get around them. In my case, he said, I'm sorry, but we are a research organisation. We don't have our people in here. And I said, well, what about the scholars? I said, and he said, oh, well, they're scholars, so they're academics, so that's all right. I understood. So I crept away, and I got a postcard that I picked up in a museum, and I did a copy of it with gold leaf, everything else. And then I went back to the directorate and taught my way back in, and I just put that on his desk. And he went as white as a sheet. He said, well, where did you get this from? He thought I'd cut it out of one of the So I said, well, I did it. And he said, did you do it? And I said, can any of your scholars do that? And he said, well, you've got me there. No, they couldn't. He said, okay, you can bring your pace in. So they'd always say that. I always find it very difficult. Someone says no. I usually take it. But I'm telling you that don't. My dad said it to me. It didn't mean a lot to me, but when I really cared, I didn't take no. So that was it. So I had to look, I had to copy, and I had to look at, and I unpicked a manuscript here just to show you, and it's in your book. I mean, you had a book, you got that, and I did it for that book. But basically, it's a drawing. most of the medieval things are done with sketch, pen sketch. In some, there's a sort of pencil sketch, but they didn't have pencils in those days. They just had to use lead, and that wasn't all that good. But it gave them an idea. Then you do the pen. Then a light wash. In this case, you built up a pale wash first. Then on this one here, I've missed out something. You put the gold down first. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Put the gold first, because gold leaf sticks to paint. And if you put it on afterwards, it sticks everywhere. And you've got to spend half your time cleaning it off. So it's practical. Put the gold first. Then, after you draw it, you draw, fill in the gold backgrounds, and then put the wash, first wash, second layer. And this is it. And that's all I'm trying to say is, that is fairly rough. You know, there's no real, it's scruffy. But then what happens? You go over here and you get what happens is different. I think I added more colour. I don't know. Then, why am I losing it? Oh! I'm losing it. Right. There's only two here. There are 6 segments, you see, and I was on a different track in my head. Move from that to this. And the only difference between that, which is blurry, and that, is that I've outlined it in black. Actually, looking at this obliquely isn't helping me. It's not convincing me. I'm talking about something like that. There you are. Yeah, there you go. But the only difference between that, there, and that is that thin like that. Because all I've done is put that on, and it just, that tiny thin line brings a highlight to it, a sparkle, which brings the whole thing together. And I learned that that's how you work. You work from the back, forward, and you add, so that you just put a last little ping into it, and then you walk away. And that's it. And there's stages. There are stages. You also learn these guys did routine. They had an attitude. They worked. They got on with it. Some were scruffy, some weren't, and so on. And so that led to me being, oddly enough, whenever I was playing, doing works myself, what tended to be some religious subjects. I mean, I won't go into that too much. It wasn't from any deep-seated religious calling. I mean, who knows? I mean, and now I'm looking back, I could say, well, there's somebody being used here, but I didn't know it at the time. I just thought I was doing something I wanted to do. And so I tended to play with religious subjects. Meanwhile, I'm having to make a living. Okay? There aren't any jobs as calligraphers. I mean, it isn't a proper job. My dad died waiting for me to get a proper job. And it kind of just never worked. You know, he just couldn't understand what I was doing. And so I did, as Tim again said in his sort of comprehensive introduction, was that I did things like royal documents. That's another whole thing to explain. But there are things, again, and I'll come back to this thing personally. There are some times when you want to say something, graphically, when you want to make it look like it means something. You'll see the connection, because in this case, it's a legal document which makes somebody into our equivalent of a senator, a lord, get a title. It is part of the Constitution, except I realise we don't have a Constitution. I just realised we don't. But you have the House of Lords. So, if you're appointed a House of Lords, I mean, it could be on a Xerox piece of paper. It would be just as legal, but it wouldn't do it, would it? It wouldn't say what this was. You know, you've reached a particular stage in your career, your life, where you're whatever. So it's done in a way which makes it look like the words mean something. So, when it comes to doing the Bible, this was a training. You see what I'm getting at? So you have to come up with things which look like they're legal. I couldn't do them real old-fashioned. I wanted that because I wasn't myself. I was, you know, relatively young, doing things like that. This is actually one for the chief rabbi of the UK at the time, when he was made, because he was appointed to be in the House of Lords, just like equivalent to a senator. And then, but I was getting jobs everywhere: sign painting, picture was taken by my wife just before we were married. You would have thought she'd have got a message. This wasn't really a very reasonable match to be making. And, sign painter. What does your husband do? Well, he's a sign painter. And so, but it was almost anything I could do, and working for commercial purposes, advertising. So advertising for a bank. This will date it. Just be prepared to look at a bit of history, you younger people. There she is on her mobile phone. And guess where I learned the technique to do that? Well, I learned it by copying medieval methods. It comes in handy once in a while. Every now and again, of course, there are forms of lettering is when you realise that last-minute card when you haven't bought one and it's a special event. So you creep into the studio and panic, and a bit of panic, produce a card for the wife. And also to things like this. So you remember the attitude that you learn from looking at the past is really fantastic work. You see tremendous stuff, but you also see humanity, you see frailty, you see problems, and people have to get over them. And this was me doing a book of signatures for the Royal Post Office, the Royal Mail, we call it, Post Office. So a rather Victorian sort of fussy-duddy kind of, the Post Office thinks of itself as, close to God, if not God itself, when you're in line anyway in the Post Office. And so here's me doing that. And one of the ways I did was I actually produced these little jewels at the bottom of the pages, and people would sign in the blanks. Well, that was the idea. The trouble is that it was on paper, and it's very difficult to make mistakes on paper because you can't really scrape them off. You don't get a second chance. You can on vellum. And I drop my brush on the bottom of the thing, make a blot in the bottom, so I turn it into jewel, and then don't put it in there, and then so there you are. So, thank you. I actually, I enjoy that myself, thank you. But that attitude to doing it. So there's a certain amount of what can we do? So all of this is telling you, this is somebody who's learning things through life, doing different jobs, actually working and teaching. This is a standard professor's uniform in England. they haven't caught on in Oxford yet. But, so let's just have a quick dash of light, please. That involves just throw one switch and. Excellent, right. Okay, now I'm just going to get onto the Bible. But in a way, you see, I have been onto the Bible ever since I started. It just doesn't start with somebody sitting down at a desk and coming up with ideas for a Bible. So, is there anything anybody would like to ask me, just real quick? Yeah, I have a question at the back. I have one at the front. Yes?
So if you would drop your pen 3/4 of the way through one of the pages of the St. John's Bible, you couldn't make a little jewel in the corner. Would you have to start over on that
No.
page?
This is what we come to. Well, I don't actually. Do I show it? I can't remember. Of course, there were mistakes, but what the attitude learned in this, looking at the past, my life anyway, meant that you prepared for them. Technically, if you make a mistake halfway down a column, and what is the kind of mistake you usually make? The kind of mistake you make is when you look up at the copy. We're not going to be able to cover every aspect of the way this Bible was made. It was fabricated, it was laid out by computer, by me, who's not a computer person, sitting next to a computer person, who was, I designed the script. We sort of mimicked the script with a multiple master font, if that means anything to anybody here, so that you could literally squeeze it, press it, not for looks, but just to get it so that it hit the similar amount of characters per line that I had been doing with the hand. So it was a strong vertical 2-column design for each page, The snag is you have to register it nice and tidy on the right hand side. So that meant that whatever copy we were working from had to be pretty nearly imitating that script to the point where you could actually do it. You would have a good chance of hitting it, because you've got to eyeball it. So this is the beginning of what becomes a long answer, but it's a good thing, because I realise I always miss out on this bit. The thing sat there, computer disk. Look, there are 200 different stories for every element of this Bible thing. I could tell you that when we got the script, we'd done the disc, we found out that the people in California who sent the NRSV disc to us had sent us the wrong version, and so we were just about to get started on the whole of whichever book it was, quite a thumping historical book, and it wasn't the right text. So, I mean, you could just go off and off and off into tangents. You see how tempting it is. So, but going back to this, just on the straightforward, just imagining yourself into it, I had to work out a text that actually looked like it meant what it was saying. That it wasn't italic, nice and fancy, lots of flourishes every other word, something that was formal, sensible, upright, legible to people who are normally looking at calligraphy, and yet looked just as the royal document had to look royal, the legal document has to look legal, but this has to look sacred. You had to have something that was capable of maintaining your eye and your interest page after page after page. So that was important. That was then imitated, flowed through all of the columns. You create your, nowadays, you can actually talk to a group now, and people got far more idea what font means, they got far more idea about the idea of managing text than whatever they did, 15 years, 20 years ago. It's quite interesting. And so people are more graphically aware, really. But what you're also not aware of is the deficit that is between something that's done by hand and something that's been done by that. It's something that you just, as my dad always used to say, you don't miss what you never had, which is complete rubbish. I'm looking at people driving around in posh cars now. Well, no, I don't have that. See, these words of wisdom are just, they deserve second appraisals. So you get, back to the mistake. You've got a piece of vellum there. It's all lined up. It's white. It's beautifully prepared. It could also have got somebody else having written on the back of it, or somebody done an illumination on the back of it. These things were in different stages as you went along. In theory, they're all written first, and the holes are there, and then you put the decoration, and you put the illumination or the interpretation, or the capitals in last. But that didn't always work that way. And so it takes steady nerve to sit down and write, take breaths, and be able to let it flow when you're actually panicking, and when you actually, your very instinct is to cross your legs, chew your jaw tight, and the whole thing is to not do that, is to let that go and let it flow. And that is where that's when the real pro, that's when it comes in. And that's why the team people who are involved in that had to sit down every day and do that. It takes a lot. And thing is, the way you do it, there's your vellum, there's your sheet there with each line, and you're looking up and you're eyeballing it. You look up and you start writing. And you've got to try and make sure that it hits that line on the end by hand. If you do that tiny bit too fat, the letters just a little bit too wide, you start to realise you're running out of space. You're running out of light. So you've got to then start doing this with it, and then perhaps even sort of overlapping them. I didn't think of this. I'm going off. Doesn't matter. Too bad. You can all go home anytime you like. If you say, for instance, you do an N, I don't know if you can all see that. Right. This is a little bit bigger than it would be. So you realise you're getting there. One of the things is in English, you have very few opportunities to abbreviate. In Latin, you had a string of options. You could just put a little tick over a thing, which the educated reader would obviously know that that meant nostrum, could just go NOS and a little, and then that, that's if they were running out of space, they could just do that. Or, likewise, we couldn't do it. We've only got pretty much an ampersand. So an N is a tricky one, because every now and again you try and get an A to sort of say fit into that, then that could look like an R or something like that. So you, I don't know if you can't, I don't know, buddy, that I can't win. So the whole thing is you stitching them together, and then I think, I don't know what this looks like even from this side, but you don't have a top line, so again, it's too small to measure. If you put a top line, you would still, you'd miss it, you'd be below it or above it, because you literally have to build into yourself the size. You have to build the nib, the size, you have to keep trimming it. So the point where, you develop little tricks, say a T, you would then go straight from there to an I. Or, when I do this, I just completely dry up. Have you ever been asked to doodle to order? You can do it forever. But somebody said, just doodle while I film you. I just died. And I'm doing it right now. I'm just doing it now. So anyway, what I'm saying is you stitch, and you stitch them together. You can't do much about S's. They're done so and so. You can't really join that something. But letters are actually, they like to be part. They group. They like to hold hands, as you go along, and so that they can dance in a row. But you try to stitch them together so you get a line. You don't get lots of little dots. I mean, sorry. I had not intended to go here at all. Or while I have this in my hand, I will do a little bit of something else while we're on letters. This is all. I haven't even got to the point of a mistake yet, have I? So you see what I mean? This just expands everything. So nobody else will be asking questions after this. Let's face it. Oh my goodness. But every letter that you make, every little letter contains in it the energy of your whole body. It isn't just from your backside or your wrist or your fingers. It starts here, starts there. Even when you're sitting, so you've got to sit, feet on the ground, and it's all of you. So that each little unit of letter, which is a word, contains a little pocket of energy, and that remains there forever once it's put there. So it's not just say, and also I'll just do this. Say, for instance, you have a letter like this, which is obviously just to show. I just stopped, didn't I, while I was talking, and God, what's happened to mess? I'll do this again. What I'm saying is, let me just make a point. Let me just do it. I'll stand in front of it. Let's say that. Okay. So what? That doesn't. That didn't start. I didn't just do that. Let me just go back. What I did was this. I went. It's like a plane landing and taking off again. And when that stroke did not end there, I went like this. But where it ended, this far off the paper. So it's like tennis, if you like. You don't play tennis like this, or golf like that. You not that I'm playing either of those games, but you go through and it's gone. It's gone, but your arm's here. Or mine would be. But that, if you take that and remember it, that from here, just like playing a line, it's all those little units stitched together. And that, I've gone into this because it matters, because I said it's personal. So it's personal, it's physical. It has energy, and it goes into the Word forever. So that's why you would do a Bible this way. So, not very often, every 500 years or so. I don't ask too much. In fact, if my wife would say, if anything with my wife would be 1,000 years really. But having so I don't know. We never got to the mistake. If you get halfway down, well, the biggest mistake is you look up and you start at the wrong line. Especially if it makes sense. You see, let's say it reads on, therefore you shall find several sheep or something like that, whatever. But in fact, it should have been said, therefore you shall look for something else, and then find several sheep. You know, so that's the big one. And if that happens, you've had it, because you'd have to remove the whole of a chunk. If you did it on the last 3 lines of a column, you could scrape 2 or 3 lines off. You get really good at that. You can do that. You've got layers of skin. It depends on the character of the skin, because it's also individual. But then you can take that down nice and fine. If I looked at that earlier book, you can always find mistakes. You look in any of the medieval books here, you'll find a mistake, you see where it's been erased. And sometimes smooth back down again, and then you write over it, and you can, if you're lucky, get away with it. If you can't, then you have to honestly state, sorry, and that's where a few of them, they're basically where you've missed out a line, and just put it at the bottom, and say, sorry, I just did it, and then make a bit of a joke of it, and get some bird pointing like this. Yeah, I think there are 1 or 2 here, I've just realised. I'm going to, we've gone way over time, I just don't know how this happened. It's tonight, it's just is the way it is. Anyway, I'm going to get on. So I'm concentrating a lot, really, I suppose, on trying to get you under the skin of it, under the skin of the way, what it takes to get, what goes into it. And I'm going to move on. If I have the lights off a minute now, it's race on a bit. That was an idea I had in the desert. I had myself, and this is just illustrates real quick where the theologians come in. One of the ideas I suggested, when I first suggested this to the Abbey, they said, well, what would it look like? I mean, what are you talking about? You know, I mean, is it, you know, whatever, what would it look like? And I'd been in a ghost hunt in New Mexico for a week, just in a sort of retreat with a dozen other artists. And we were asked to bring our dream project. Guess what mine was? And so I did this thing, and it was sort of, in my mind I was thinking it was Christ in the wilderness, where the angels come and, you know, after 40 days, 40 nights, the devil is cast out. The devil isn't being cast out on this one, but it doesn't matter. This was the sort of idea. He was out at the bottom. And to me, untrained, as in theology and so on, the punch line was that magic thing when the devil is cast out, the desert explodes with angels who come to help him out. But of course, that wasn't what the theologians see as the high point of that particular episode. That was my sketch. That was a finished piece that came from, this was my finished proposal, as it were. I was thinking, it could look something like this. This is one of my very first proposals to them. So there you have the devil falling out. That was done after my particular 7 nights in the wilderness. But they said, well, no, that's not how we see it. What we see it is the baptism of Christ is the key moment there. Because he comes from there, and John the Baptist baptizes him, and then leaves. That is the main point. So, you know, that lifetime of working with advertising people, working for clients, you looking for the brief. So, tell me and I'll try to get what it is you want, even if it's not what you know you want. And which is the case. That is what you do, and it was the case with the theologians. So they told me that. I went away and just did a little sketch on a legal pad, and I thought, all right, that's it. So the centre of it is Christ being. So that was my first sketch. Then it developed into that in the end, which some of you will know, please. But of course, Christ is there in the centre, and there's a lot more. I haven't done the whole thing, but that shows you that my ideas were completely subservient in terms of what the focus of an interpretive illumination was. But how I actually how that was presented was down to me, with suggestions from them. They gave me bunches of ideas, and I was to choose whatever I liked or not. But that's how that developed, changed. And when I did it, I thought, well, I had to feel my own way into these things. How could it make sense to me? Because I wasn't taking it just somebody was telling me this is what happened, and I said, sure. It had to mean something to me if I could get it to mean something to anybody else. And so I thought, John the Baptist was the main man. He'd been the one that everybody in thousands, he was the pop star, as it were. And then he had to hand over voluntarily and walk away. And my feelings were stayed with him as he walked away. And that's why he ended up being so prominent at this. But he's looking back, but he's leaving, Christ as still in the centre with the words above saying, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased," or words to that effect. And so on. So this puts it into scale, the kind of thing me and the size of the page. That's the reason for that in my workshop. This shows you how the planning was. Each of these pages were printed out full size, but they're also printed small, so I could, show and keep track of the progress of the different illuminations as they were being done. Because I had to give one illumination to Tom Ingmeyer in San Francisco, because I thought that was the kind of thing he would really be good at. Another one to Suzanne in Seattle, and so on, and various bits. So that's what it looked like. That was, I think, the historical book, the biggest book. That's what it physically looks like. All of those things, the lines of all of the different pages for that book. That's how it was in the end. Right? Then you've got the team there, the team of scribes. The original three: Brian Simpson, Sally Mae, who's worked all the time in the studio with me. And these guys, these two, would go away and work at home and bring them back, and they would compare notes every 6 or 7 weeks, and all to try to make sure that we were all looking alike. Sarah, the hair here is Sarah, my assistant, and she took over from Sally as studio manager, and you see the pages as they come in. This is the full team. At the end, I ended up with 5 full-timers, 5 people helping on script, on the text. And so I had to give up my desk, which is usually here, when they came. And so there we have, she used to be my assistant, a very good calligrapher, no confidence whatsoever, lots of tears, and brilliant, lovely writing, but lots of support. And I'm blanking now. I realise it because I realise I've gone over time, so it's bugging me. Brian, Sally Mae, Sue Houghton, Susie Leaper, who was in Edinburgh, so she used to come up and down from Scotland, and Angela Swan. And we've got a few flags, Welsh flag here, so this is the environment that we were in. But it all comes down to that, a really messy business of just blacking on the end of a feather, writing on a page, and bringing into it all of that emotion and movement and energy that I was just mentioning. And that at the end of the day, Sarah just locked out, just took photographs of all 6 of us, the work, and just tiled them together. It doesn't make sense. She just put them together. I mean, she didn't especially choose them. But there's 6 people's writing there. But they don't appreciably look that much different. And never, two different hands were never on the same opening. So whatever scribe did one page, it was always facing some of their own writing. Even though sometimes it would be on, you have 3 different people's writing on one piece of skin. It was a logistical nightmare, but it worked out. So that whenever you have an opening, Sally wrote that, and the same for me. So you've got obviously each of us, and we had one full page spread in the end. I think it was Letters from Revelation, and there was no decoration on it. And I said, right, split it into 6, and we'll each do a piece. So one of the openings in the Bible, rather, as a yoke, because I was thinking about Mary's, has got all of our writing on it. There's just one where we were just a bit of indulgence, and at the bottom we signed it, as it were, with these little chops. So there's mine, etc., etc. So we did achieve a level of unity, not uniformity, but unity of purpose. The whole point was that we all felt we were playing the same tune. We were aiming for the same thing. And you have to end up with these different texts, different lettering has different reasons, different emphasis, and then having fun, painting capitals, which have always been a case. They have a completely different reason in medieval works, and then but I had the fun of doing all those at the end, because there are 2 purposes. One is they do relieve the unremitting sort of plainness, if you like, but they also they're for fun. I mean, just make them up and go for it. They're done fast. They're done very quickly, with a pen for the most part, sometimes filled in with a brush, and so on. And but they liven the pages and they invite you in. That's their purpose. That's again a reminder of scale. Up here you've got Izzy Plodwinski, Israeli scribe, came into the studio and did all of the running heads and the little letters. Wherever there was Hebrew, wherever the source of the text is Hebrew, then I had that. You have the English, let's say, Judges on this side, and then on the right you'd have Judges in Hebrew, and likewise the books in those volumes. The idea being to bring in the fact that this was rooted in the Jewish text. Izzy Plodwinski, yeah. Isidore is his full name. He's a sort of official scribe, Hebrew scribe, but he's also a skilled Western cleaver. So he came and worked. He had a special dispensation to work on the Christian Bible, but there's a prayer for everything. It seems. Research, looking into the Bible. I will stop shortly. I'm going to put the lights on. I know there are things that we could show you, but I just chose to do what I did tonight. I'm sorry, we just talk the way we are. And so, I would get this ring binder thing here, and you see the yellow. I'm sorry I keep looking at this one, but you can see these yellow highlights here. Well, that would be what I thought was the most punchline-y thing about the briefs. This is the theologians. They gave me the exegesis. They give you the background. In Israel at this time, they were in bad shape. They were already in bondage. They were doing this. They were messing up in one way or another. And God's saying, what's going on? And I told you, do it my way, and etc. And you get into the rhythm of seeing what's that. Because I have to. It doesn't make sense. As a kid, this was going. all over me when I was sitting in the chapel listening to all this. Somebody would get this, person would get that. and I mean, you didn't mean anything. So I had to get under it. So they would come out with the history, the general background, and the exegesis, i.e. what's our take, what is our Roman Catholic and specifically take on what this all means. And then they say, gee, wouldn't it be fun to do X, Y, or no, they give me a list of things that could come out of it and so on. And I would have to look at that. And then I look at that and I look at the Bible. So my Bible, I will go to hell because I was always taught as a child that if you put any mark on the Bible, you go to hell. So, that's it. So look what I've done for you guys. And so make notes, and I try to get excited about it, and then come on. Then I look in museums, you look at what's going on, what happened at the time of Christ, at the time of in the past though, at the time of Christ, in the Old Testament, you know, when they talked about these headed beasts and things, that wasn't such a foreign thing. There were carvings lying all over the floor around them in the street that had these images on them, the Assyrian images, the temple guardians, you know, or the eagles headed and so on. So when it comes to the apocalypse and all those weird things, they were actually not that far-fetched, and they were already in their cultural history or like memory, and so on. So that then translated it, in this case for me, into, you know, the vision of Cheval. And in that comes that little, there's a remark somewhere in there where it says something along, and it was like the rays in the sky on a rainy day, i.e. rainbow. And so that came in, and that became a little thing where there is hope. That was another childhood thing in my biblical upbringing, was, you know, that the rainbow was God's promise that, you know, that was, well, that figures, that's all right, I can, that would be, that's good. So in amongst all this horror and scary, you've got that hope. Looking at life, we're looking at sources, the ideas, where do they come from? Real life, you know, some people do this every day for lunch. So we have, I just took this and put it into, as looking at the knowledge we now have. In the Middle Ages, didn't know all this stuff. You didn't know that, you know, you couldn't download it. And so that's fed into this. Also, too, my own personal link between the bones and the horrors that we do to each other. They're just unimaginable, sickening things that have been done in Russia, China, anyway, like, it's not Iraq, it's somewhere else. And, but also, we're doing it right on our own doorstep. We all know places like this. You know, we've got them in our neighbourhoods. We've got wreckers yards, and I was flying over big infill sites, you know, dumps as I flew over some beautiful countryside, and looking at that, and I'm thinking, this is what we're doing to our world, not just each other. And so, things like that creep in. And so I ended up by making this sort of, you know, skulls, and bones of what we're doing to our world. Those eyeglasses there are from heaps and heaps that were in Auschwitz. You know, that's a GI, skull of a GI in Iraq, uncovered when people went in. And Armenia, you name it, you know. That's what's part of our world, you know, and in this thing, how do you make sense of this? I will put bones, you know, I mean, you will rise again, I mean, on the flesh. I mean, that just didn't work. It just didn't work for me. So, in fact, what happened was, I found myself in dwelling in this car in a wrecker's yard. Took me back to childhood, in my dad's workshop, where the roof leaked. I didn't like the place. It was the back of the workshop. It was a workshop. It wasn't his pottery place. And there was oil all in the floor and so on. And the roof leaked in this very scary as a child place, which was dirty and broken windows. But when it rained, the rain fell on the floor and it fell on the oil. and in the oil was a rainbow. And that was magic. I can remember squatting, looking at, trying to work that out. And so mixed with this horror was this hope. And once I made that connection with that childhood emotion, then the whole thing worked. And I just put at the bottom here a little bit of the oil in amongst the wreckage of the way we just seem to mess up. And from it ascends into a heavenly hope. From bones. Not real life people jumping about on top of on the bones that are there. But the key is in the quote, which I can't read from here, but it is, when I picked amongst the text, I realised, then it says, I will put my spirit within you and you shall live. That I could get, that this meant that in the mess from it, the spirit can rise out of it. So, yes, does this change me? Yes, it does. I've realised now looking back. I'm going to, I have to, for sense of responsibility to all, I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to just show you this it just shows you here, it's the very first page I ever did for the project. I was still trying to figure out how it was going to look. It wasn't all elaborately planned. I had a series of holes. I had a series of texts written and holes in which to put these various things. And the brief for this page was completely insufficient, because it said, this is before they'd figured out how to brief and ask for things. And they said, it should just be just on the first page of Matthew, it should say, it should represent the whole sweep of Jewish history. One sentence. It's a fact, folks. And I then spent months panicking and working and trying to do. But in the end, what I did was, I found myself using it as an opportunity. Somebody said, I said, what's all this? Why? I mean, I can get the fact that in order to establish, as it were, not authenticity, I'm saying, validity of Christ. It had to fulfill a prophecy, and it had to come from Abraham, etc., etc. So, as is in all primitive, or not so primitive societies, there is this tendency to go back. Oh yes, go back. And there's always this link of kings with whatever religion is, top dog at the time. So that, me and God, sort of thing, rule. So that's always been part of history. But the idea is that what has always been a constant, I'm going to have to wrap up, is that people long to reach out for that which is beyond. It doesn't seem to make sense, all this day-to-day stuff. There's got to be something else. And that applies as much to Buddhists with their mandalas, and this is a Buddhist decoration here, coming from a Buddhist mandala. I think, I don't know what's next, wrong one, no idea. There's little bits of Islamic decoration which refers to other people's ways of reaching out to what they long for. As in Psalms where I took chants of Native Americans. I took Greek Orthodox and oscillographs and mixed them all in. So throughout this thread for me was this acknowledging that there are other ways. There are other ways, always have, but the basic longing is there, and the basic promises are there. And so just as in passing at the end of this is all showing the whole sweep of Jewish history, mind you, is I did marry the name. I also asked for the names of the women attached to these men, because I thought, well, one of the aims of St. John's Bible was to be more inclusive. Well, here's a chance. Well, that wasn't briefed. I just thought, well, this is an opportunity. And so the other thing too was that I think here was, I can't actually see it, so I don't know why. I think it must be not this way. What I found was somebody said to me, well, you know, these people are real people, and some of them are no better than they ought to be. I mean, some of these people, you know, they're really horrid people. I mean, they've got bad histories. Quite a lot of them weren't actually married to the women whose children then succeeded them, and so on and so forth. And I thought, wait a minute, that sounds a bit like my family. And now, seriously, I thought, well, that makes sense. This is people. So that's when I got the idea of putting a DNA, the symbols, the little DNA symbols sprinkled. Actually, I think there's just a fragment here, but they're scattered in amongst it, which was saying basically, we are one. We are all one. And that I could get behind, I could understand. So that ignited it for me, and it made sense to me. So all along, it's been a search. I'm now going to put the lights on. I mean, I don't think, we could go on, and so on. But I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right now, but I'm not going to stop. You know better than that by now. Is just to sort of try, and I mean, this is, the last time I gave a talk was about 3 weeks ago, and I messed up. Well, I sort of didn't, but I did. And I thought tonight, well, I won't mess up. And I've done it in a different way, so that's why I've gone into it. But what I wanted to say was, the process, one of the most often asked questions has been the most difficult one of all to answer to this point of me. How has this changed you? And I mean, that's a really tough one. And up to this point, I'm embarrassed by and sort of defensive about it. You know, like, are they expecting me to start sort of going out, sort of proclaiming, you know, whatever it is, become an evangelist or become you know, go to Africa and do what those people do. I've realised, actually, the thing is that you couldn't get this far with it without realising this document really means business. It is life. It is relevant that the Bible has got this. It's got all the mistakes. It's got loads of things. It's got the worst possible things people do to each other. But it also has love, which is the hardest of all. And that too, I mean, as you probably know, some of you do, that on the morning that the Twin Towers of the 9/11, I was actually working on a piece which was the Luke anthology, it's called, in which you have, where you were being asked, Jesus was really telling us parables to try to get people to grasp the enormity of God's love for us, of the power of the Spirit, of that availability. And he talks about the widow losing a little bit of something and tearing the house apart to find it, which was nonsense. Everybody realises that. But God actually would do that for you. And then the same, and then you've got the Samaritan, where, you know, this guy is showing love to somebody, and he doesn't, in fact he's even told he shouldn't do, but he does. And then there was the prodigal son was also one, another impossible thing. He does all the wrong things, he ends up feeding pigs, he ends up eating pig food. We all know the story of the prodigal son. I mean, I'm the eldest in my family. I don't know, but as a kid I longed to smack that guy. Did I want to smack him? You know, he just cashes in, comes back once more, and then gets it, you know. And the eldest son's there doing all the chores and no way. But I didn't know. And I was working with Aidan Hart on that little strip where the father is rejoicing and forgiving this child, this young man, this layaway. When my wife came over from the house, which was just across the lane, and said, I think you'd all better come across and just look at the TV. And that's in, there's probably 5 of us working there. And we all went, and you know what we saw, because don't forget, we were ahead of you in time, so we were seeing it in real time, that second thing. Well, the first thing was sheer anger and powerlessness, and who are you going to hit? You know, And I went back to my desk, and I said to the other person, Sally Mae was just so in pieces. But I mean, it affected everybody. It affected us, just around the world. So you guys do. And I was doing that, but I sat down, as I often do when there's trouble. I start work, and I just found myself putting 2 vertical gold columns in that piece where I was the most mad, and I realised the message was, and this was a message for 9/11, was you have to love, well, put it this way, you have to find a way of loving yourself out of this. You can't hate yourself out of it. It just doesn't work. And so I'll just end on that. The point being that if you dig, you find. If you unpeel the onion, you find. Some people pray their way to it. I just took my way to it. And that's what you find on every page of the Bible. Everybody put that kind of feeling in it. Thomas Ingmar there. An unbeliever by any stretch of imagination. Freewheeling Californian of the most stereotypical that you would, think. But he got dug into that, and the rabbi, seeing that, said that it brought to mind to him an old teaching, looking at the bottom in particular. He said it made him think that the words were not just to be read on a plane, but to be walked around, to go behind them and come back out around the other side and experience those words in a different kind of way, because in that journey around them you have changed, and so on. So there is there is endless opportunity for you, any of you guys who get the opportunity to look at this Bible, whether it's printed or in the original form. Carry with you some of what I've said, I hope, if you ever do get that experience. And know that dig inside yourselves, I promise you'll find. Thank you very much for that.
Let me invite people, if you'd like to ask questions afterwards. But if you need to leave to head out, I want to thank Donald for being here, and we look forward to having the Bible here.